don't you like what Paul says? We've got it all together with God. Well, you can end there. But that part sounded good, didn't it? We've got it all together with God. Because of what Jesus did. Well, yeah, that part too. But we've got it all together with God. Now, I'm not getting excited here. Maybe you don't quite believe that. I hope not. In the sense that Jesus has opened the door and welcomed us in as God's children. And because God created us to be his children, and we've got it all together with God. Not because of anything we said or did. My professor, Roberta Bondi at school, taught us humility is not self-deprecation. It's not beating yourself up. It's admitting what gifts and graces and good things you have, good qualities you have, but attributing those to their Creator rather than to yourself. It's okay to celebrate the gifts and graces and talents and skills we have. That doesn't make us better than somebody else, however. It just makes us useful. Peter reminds us that God plays no favorites. I was kind of hoping God would, How about you? Wouldn't it be nice if Christians were God's favorites? If Methodists were God's favorites? Wouldn't that be good? Sometimes Methodists think they're God's favorites. Sometimes Christians think they're God's favorites too. It's like the parents who had two children and one excelled in school and did great and went off to an Ivy League college and the other one got kind of involved in drugs and kind of made a mess of his life and the parents were obviously happier with this one, but they still loved them both and then this one even in a drugged out haze saw a little child in front of a car and it was bearing down and swept the child away and was run over and killed, and this one ended up in Wall Street and was taking millions of dollars from old people. Hard to know sometimes, isn't it? In any given moment, people can look good or evil. And we just never know. Because each one of us has all that in us. There's a wonderful Native American parable. The grandson comes to his grandfather and says, what is it about us that is so troubling sometimes that I know I want to be good, but I can't be. And grandfather says that life is like having two wolves inside of you. That one is always seeks good and peace and kindness, and the other is always full of hate and prejudice and bloodlust. And the young man says, well, which one wins? And grandfather says, the one I feed the most. All of us have that inside of us. And God knows that. And God loves us anyway. Sometimes we do what's pleasing in our parents' sight. Right? Wasn't pleasing your parents something you always wanted to do? Well, except when you didn't want to do it. Because part of growing up is separating from your parents. And sometimes you have to convince yourself there's a good reason to do that. So you have to find reasons not to like their music or their rules or something so that you can break away. Used to drive my daughter nuts when I would sit and sing songs with her on the radio because I liked her music. You know. Or even better, she'd have the radio on and a song would come on and I'd start singing along and she'd say, "You know that song?" I said, "Well, yeah, it was, a big song in the 60s. "Oh, really?" It's really good now, too. Kind of messed with her mind a little, Because there's that need to separate. And, crazily enough, we have that need to separate from God at times, too. Now, that doesn't really make sense, does it? Why should we want to do that? But until we can separate from the parent, it's hard to really know who we are individually and in our own person. And so I think it's just a natural process that as we go through a life in faith, there are times when we distance ourselves from God. The beauty of it is, like any parent that is a loving parent, they allow that. They don't move, they just stay right there, just waiting until we, come to our senses and realign our relationship. Most of us do that in our teenage and college years. We separate, but we come back in a different relationship with our parents. And it only makes sense that we do that with God, too. And each one of us, all human beings, are in that process somewhere. And sometimes people seem pretty distant from God. Sometimes they seem pretty close. And I think that relationship changes as we understand how relationships do. The troubling part is that most of us want to be our parents' favorite. Right? Yes, we do. Everybody's looking at us. We want to be, the favorite. Now, ask my brother and sister, and they will say that I'm the favorite of the family. Because I was the caboose. They're 12 and 10 years older than me. And there were two of them when mom and dad were just starting out and didn't have a lot to do. But, 10 years later, when they're more established, they only had one kid. So, I got all the stuff. Spoiled rotten. Ask my brother, he'll tell you. Ask him this week when you see him, and you can't miss him. He looks just like me, except with glasses. He'll tell you. A lot of times it's the oldest child in the family that, is got to be is often the favorite. As his mother's brother said, Mom always liked you best. Now, that may be a degree of how happy they are with that particular child at that particular time, or maybe their expectations. But I don't think there's many parents that love one kid more than the other. They might be mad at one of them now and then. And you know what? I think God gets mad with us now and then too. If we understand that relationship as child and parent, why not? Didn't you get mad at your kids once in a while? Did you stop loving them? No. Sometimes you got mad at them for their own good, didn't you? And I think sometimes God does that too. The hard part is that we really do want to be favorites. And sometimes that leads us to say things that aren't really very good theology, but they sure make us feel better. It's like, well, we're going to heaven and you're not. We're all going to be surprised when we get there. Either that or we're going to really enjoy the company one of the too, I'm not sure. But God plays no favorites. And that's hard to take sometimes when we want to be the favorite. Actually, if you read Scripture, and I take this, again, I've been enjoying some of the things that the musician that was here last fall, Jonathan Crane, has written in his No One is Better Than Anyone Else, which is saying the same thing. Is that, but, if you look at the Gospels, Jesus does kind of play favorites. And he plays favorites with those people that nobody else wants. He plays favorites with the sick. And he plays favorites with the disenfranchised, with the people on the edges, with the people on the margins, with the poor. If God plays favorites in the Gospels, it's with the kind of people we don't like to be around. You know. That's a little even more trouble, isn't it? If God plays favorites, it's not with the good, healthy church folk. In fact, he had a lot of trouble with them. Boy, that's hard to hear. Isn't that hard to hear? If Jesus had trouble with anybody, it was the good church folk. The ones he most reached out to were the ones that were despised by the good church folk. The ones that were pushed out of town, the ones that were pushed out of the synagogue, the ones that weren't allowed to be touched are the ones he touched the most. Peter says God plays no favorites. But if he does, it's with the people we'd rather not associate with. That's a tough one. I thought this Christian life was supposed to be all, what's the English phrase? I love that English phrase. Beer and Skittles. Happy days are here again. It is a blessed life to be in the grace of our beloved parent God. But it's not necessarily without its troubles or its challenges. In fact, Paul says sufferings are kind of important. And Paul knows that we human beings are lazy. Oh, did I say that out loud? Without challenge, we're content just to sit around and, take it easy. Without challenge, we don't grow. Without the pain caused by tornadoes, we don't learn to make buildings more tornado-proof. Or the fact that maybe someone should put a shelter in a house or in a school. Or maybe we could develop early warning systems so we could know even longer ahead of time. Oh, yeah, we've done those things. See, those natural calamities teach us how to overcome difficulties. They challenge us. And unfortunately, we humans kind of need challenge. I'd like to say we were just self-motivated and we'd do it anyway, but that's not been my experience. Challenge is good for us. And our parent knows that. What parent doesn't know that for their kids? What happens when your kid never has to work, never has to do anything, you just give them everything they want? What happens? Not good things, right? Unless they have to work for something now and then, unless they learn those values, you end up with a spoiled kid you really don't want to deal with anymore. I think God knows that too. I mean, if we know it, certainly God ought to know it, right? So sometimes we're challenged. We need to work for it a little. After World War II and the 50s and early 60s, and even a while before the war, the church, the mainline church in America, didn't have to work for it. All they had to do was build a building. It was the field of dreams. Build it and they will come. And they did, by the millions. Well, now we got to work for it. It's not that easy anymore. Problem was, we all just sat back in our pews and went, well, this is easy. We'll just ride this to the glory. Just sit here in the station and wait for the train to come. And guess what? The station burned down. And the train hadn't come yet, so it's time to go out and get to work again. God knows that challenge is necessary. And so as we look at declining Christians all over this country, of course, if we look to places where it is being done, like Africa and Southeast Asia and places like that, the church is growing like crazy, like wildfire. So maybe it's time for us to remember that a little trial, a little suffering, a little challenge is a good thing, because that motivates us to do the things that we know God needs us to do, wants us to do, so that others might know Him too. Others might know God's love. Knowing that while that may make our parent happy, doesn't make God love us any more than those who don't know God. In fact, God may even have a soft spot for those that don't know God, because they're the ones still lost. They're the ones that still God's worried about. And needs folks like us to reach out to them and let them know about where home really is, and who their parent really is, and how much they're loved.